Ed, great to have you.
Great to be here.
I know you from quite a while back. For my audience, why don't you give a quick introduction about who you are, what do you do?
Yeah, so my name's Ed Greig. I'm the chief disruptor at Deloitte. So my job and my team's job is to work with new technology and look at how we can get it delivering real tangible impact as quickly as possible to our clients, to ourselves within Deloitte, and to wider society.
What does the word chief disruptor mean? Especially, it's a fancy, snazzy name on a business card, but I'm intrigued to see where did you get this name from and perhaps a history around it.
Yeah, so I think that when I first started out under the title of disruptor, there was this focus on new technology. That was something that we were looking to do more of, and we wanted to push our clients' thinking and get them to think bigger and think further ahead in terms of what was possible with technology and what they could do. And so that was the genesis for the role. And it was also that we wanted to bring that to life for people as well. And so within our studio, which was in Clerkenwell, that was something that the leader of Deloitte Digital at that time, Sam Roddick, really wanted to bring out and really wanted to have front and center as part of people's experience of coming into the studio. And so that was the idea behind it. We did workshop a few different names. So Disruptor was one of them, but my mum also suggested Queen Bee because it was about the cross-pollination of ideas, but you did really have to say cross-pollination of ideas each time. And so I don't think that title would have worked as well. I think that the thing that's really useful about it is it does grab people's attention and it does kind of bring them out of the status quo. And I think that is very important. And actually, that was the function of our studio as well. The idea was that it was a very different space. And I think that was very effective in terms of getting people to think differently, because if they're in a space that's too much like a regular office, then they'll be thinking regular office thoughts about their next email and the meeting that they've got to go to when they get back. And I don't think that's the space that you want people to be in when you're trying to encourage them to reimagine their business. And so the name, I think, does that. And also we try to do that in a lot of different ways in terms of changing the space that people were in, changing the way in which we would run things, making sure that there was lots of stimulus that was encouraging them to break out of that day-to-day thinking.
Cross-pollinator is a tongue twister, so good choice. I think disruptor, it's got a nice ring to it.
It does have a nice ring to it. I would say at the moment, it's hard to compete because there are some very effective disruptors in the world at the moment. And so sometimes, that people are like, wow, do we really need more disruption right now when everything is so disrupted? But the idea of chief disruptor as well, I say, is to help you navigate that disruption as well as to cause the disruption too.
I worked in consulting as well, like you said, been in the industry for a long time.
Yeah.
Sometimes disruption's got a negative connotation to it. So how do you navigate, especially client pushback, when you are in rooms which predominantly are reliant on status quo?
I think that the way that you look to navigate it, and I think that it is one of the key aspects and kind of the hardest aspects of the job is figuring out how to do that in a way that takes people on the journey with you. I think that's the really crucial thing. Is I think you have to meet people where they are in terms of their understanding of the potential changes that are coming to their industry, and how they would want to navigate that. I think that it is very easy to it is very easy to be in a situation where you have a strong status quo bias, and that is an issue. I mean, my favorite phrase, and the phrase that is the mantra that we live by within the team is this idea of falling in love with the problem, not in love with the solution. And the falling in love with the solution can mean shiny object syndrome, where you're getting excited about all of the new things that are coming and you're falling in love with those. But it can also be falling in love with the status quo. And so when you have that situation, a lot of what my role was about was generating that sense of urgency. And what we would talk about is that need to create a shit moment for the client. So you can bleep that if you need to, but but that really was what we wanted to happen, was that they would see something that would make them go, oh my gosh, the status quo is not going to last. And I do think, I mean, Tom Goodwin talks about it a lot, that sometimes the amount of change is, by people who've fallen in love with solutions, the amount of change is overstated, and a lot more stuff does remain constant than sometimes people say. People are saying like everything's changing all the time. And I don't think that's helpful as well, because I think that can then lead to people panicking and, you know, then throwing out stuff that works because they're taking kind of an unfocused approach to it. But I think all industries need to change, need to improve, and they sometimes will need something to shake them out of that status quo bias. So figuring out what would be the particular oh shit moment for the client was the thing that was really key.
What's been the most surprising moment in your life as a disruptor?
As a chief disruptor? Well, wow, that is a really good question. A surprising question. I think that I've been really lucky. It's been very varied. I think that a lot has happened in the time that I've been a chief disruptor. As I say, I started back in 2015. And so this past 10 years, a lot of different technologies have come along and some crazy things have happened. I think that one of the most surprising things that I did that I never expected that I would do was attend the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco. So that was definitely a really unexpected moment for me. I really wanted to be a game developer when I was, and so going to GDC in 2017 was very surreal, but really amazing. That was with a game that we had built. So we built a game called Football CEO, which was designed to teach young people about business through the medium of football management, with a social enterprise that we were working with. And so that definitely stands out as a surreal moment. But I think something that has been surprising recently is my background was farming. So I grew up in a farming family, but I didn't do very much with farming at all at Deloitte until recently, where we started working with the Soil Association and the Soil Association Exchange. And so being on farms and working with farmers has been very gratifying that I've been able to do that. Another really standout moment was seeing a building scale 3D printer in the UK for the first time. We've been working on that and modern methods of construction for a long time. And so seeing that happen for the first time, that's something that really stands out for me as well. But yeah, no, there's been a wide variety of strange situations. I mean, last one as well, the one that I do always remember as well, is we were doing some work with NATO, and so we were out in Norfolk in Virginia. And so looking out of the hotel room at an aircraft carrier, that also, before kind of presenting to the client, that was also quite surprising and quite.
On the flip side, can you share a time when disruption has clashed with tradition?
That question is a less surprising one, and that has happened a lot. I think that and it's probably even harder to think of kind of examples, because there are so many of those. I think that often the issue that it clashes with tends to be quite systemic and deep-seated. I think that a lot of the work that we're trying to do, the challenge, as well as the status quo bias, I think the challenge often comes down to how the system is structured financially. And so how CFO is evaluating the work that you're doing. And so you can have everything set up right and make a very, very good business case for what it is that you're doing. But if the incentive structures aren't right within the organization, it can be really it can mean that you are banging your head against a brick wall. And I think that's really hard to overcome that and find ways around that, because sometimes the organizations are just set up in there's a lot about the organizational design that isn't even intentional, but is pushing the organization in a particular direction. Then real estate, I think one of the big challenges that we've faced, just to give an example of this, is around we've looked to kind of create buildings that evolve and spaces that evolve over time. But the real challenge is that requires, because obviously we're looking for flexibility, because what we're saying is that, obviously if you're designing a space like we were referring to at the beginning about creating a space that generates good conversation and good ideas, and is a space that's conducive to the type of work that you want to see done, that the needs of that space are going to evolve over time. And so you need the space to be flexible and adaptable. And most importantly, you need enough OPEX in place to be able to make those adaptations. And the problem is the way that real estate funding is structured is that the focus is on CapEx, not on OPEX. And so trying to say, please, can we spend less money on the upfront build and instead save some of that money in order to spend and evolve the build as the needs of the occupants change, or as we understand their needs better. So doing it in that more agile, adaptive way, that is, that proves to be really, really hard to do. You can get everyone excited about the plans and the designs and everything like that, but then when it comes down to changing that financial structure, that can be really, 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 really challenging to do. And so, in terms of how you address that, I mean, I think it's always. I think now the good thing is, I guess, I'm more aware of where those problems might come. And so you need to realize that you need to build up enough excitement capital with the CEO and the leadership team in order to get you over those hurdles, because it can be easy to be complacent when everyone's saying, this is great, we love this, we want to go forward with this. But you realize, that you might have hurdles like that to overcome. And so it's just then prepping yourself for that and trying to understand those constraints as soon as possible so that you can then address them later on. But one of the things we talk about is mindset. And so I would say that the other way in which, I mean, it's related to status quo bias, but we talk about kind of the importance of a growth mindset and the belief that you actually can change. And I think that sometimes that fixed mindset is often the thing that we're butting up against as well, because we have clients who are like, hey, look, we're doing all of these things right. We have all of the processes and the procedures and the ceremonies and everything in place, like, and we've got the right technology platforms, we're doing everything that should have worked, but they're not seeing the change. And when you come down to it, it just is there is a lack of belief amongst the workforce that kind of change is actually possible. And so the importance then of a really strong narrative to kind of drive that change is absolutely crucial. But recognizing that the problem that you face is one of cultural change, not of process. It's a cultural change problem, and you need to start thinking about it on that basis, and then figure out how you can use process and use technology to drive that cultural change. But if you think that you can do the process and do the technology and then the cultural change is just going to happen on its own, that's not going to work.
Cultural change is the hardest one. In consulting, incentives are not primarily aligned in your favor when you're in a consulting role because you're trying to influence people who have a deep rooted habit, culture of either being stuck in the past or resting on their laurels or past success is really hard to inspire them to look at the bigger picture. And this is where creative thinking is very, very helpful because the job is not to transform them technically because that's a relatively easier job. Cultural change is the hardest change and it often takes longest. Starting from farming to running your own website as a freelance web designer. I think you've been very creative. So tell me more about your creative process.
Yeah, I really enjoy that creative aspect of things. And I mean, when I was thinking about what job I wanted to do, I did dabble with the idea of doing something that was purely creative, but I found that what motivated me most was where there was that mix of creative and technical. So there was an element of kind of problem solving and but there was also the creativity and I guess kind of the practicality of it as well. So like I wanted to be able to see real change off the back of what I was doing, not just making something look good. But I do really enjoy that creative aspect as well. Like it does fuel me a lot, and I think that if I don't get a chance to, if I don't have an outlet for that for a long time, I think I you can feel that I haven't had an opportunity to do it. So I think that going back to our point about cultural change, I really enjoy creatively figuring out how you can tell those stories of cultural change. So whether that's by creating video content or whether by building a site to kind of guide people through something or building an interactive experience, all of these creative tools can be used to help drive that cultural change and drive that behavior change. And so I really enjoy that. Actually, a lot of the really interesting work that I think we've done has been with arts organizations and with theatre companies. So the first proper 360 film that we shot to be screened inside a headset was with a theatre company, and that was shown at the Edinburgh Fringe. And I think it was the first 360 film actually shown at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival back in probably would have been 2015, I think. And so that was and it was interesting because I feel like when we tried to we'd done demo films before that where we'd just filmed something, but there was something about having like a story that you needed to tell and like doing it as an actual creative endeavor with a theatre company that meant the level of like polish and effort and the number of kind of problems that you then uncovered and you overcame were much greater than if you were just filming a demo where you just kind of went with whatever was easiest and you would film something. And also it was much more engaging for clients. So we didn't in terms of then showing that versus showing the demo film, the clients were much more engaged by that more creative outlet. So I really like working with those type of, with theatre companies or arts organizations to push the boundaries of new technology, because I think that they can often take it in a surprising direction, but also I think that what they come up with, the story makes it feel more compelling to the people that you're then showing it to, which I think then is allows them to be more inspired by it and see how it could apply to them more than if it's just a technical demo.
You've been working with a lot of newcomers and
Yeah.
legacy players alike, and
Yeah.
also social enterprise. When it comes to creativity and disruption, where do you see the biggest blind spots? And how do you try to open people's minds in addressing those blind spots?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons I enjoy working for Deloitte is I think that it does allow you to see some problems that don't get a lot of attention and to work with companies that don't necessarily get a lot of attention. I think that when you look at Silicon Valley and you look at a lot of the startups, yeah, there's disruptive thinking there, but it's often very focused on the specific experience of those people who are running those startups. And so they're often not paying a lot of attention to some of these really hard, interesting problems that sit outside of their experience. I mean, one area that is kind of that we've worked on a bit, I would say, is still ripe for disruption, but is around actuarial software. And that's not something that a lot of tech bros look at and go, yeah, I really want to disrupt actuarial software. I mean, it's huge. We did a whole project on this. As I say, I still think there's a long way still to go with that. But I think those industries and those spaces often I think they feel quite unloved by that sort of by that kind of disruptive thinking. And so if you come in there and you say, hey, let's understand this problem with you and let's figure out how we can do things differently and see where these things might be useful for you. Not we're going to come in and we're definitely going to fix everything and I can't believe you haven't missed out on this stuff, because that kind of white knight attitude to like, digital will fix all of your problems or AI will fix all of your problems is understandably annoys people within the industry, because you do often see either they'll ignore an industry completely or they'll come into an industry with assuming that the industry hasn't evolved recently and that their solution will fix everything without really understanding some of the problems of it. And then they'll be like, oh my, you see it with transport a lot. Like Silicon Valley seems to every 2 or so years reinvent the bus. Like, wait, we've solved all of the problems of we put everyone in a single thing and then we'll take them on predetermined routes, and it's like you've come up with a bus again. So yeah, I think that there is that. I think sometimes it's blindness, sometimes it's arrogance. So trying to, if we are going into those blind spots or those places that seem like there is potential for disruption, doing that in a way that is humble, really falling in love with the problem, as we say, and understanding that industry really well, and then figuring out a way through that.
Speaking of falling in love with the problem, how often do you find clients have fallen in love with the wrong problem? And
I mean,
what do you do?
virtually every time. I think that it's very challenging. I think I remember once my housemate came to me saying that he needed a certain tool, like a screwdriver, I think, to fix his bike. And so we went around searching around the whole house to try and find this screwdriver. And eventually we found the screwdriver, went down to his bike and realized he needed an adjustable spanner. Like, and that is often what it feels like with clients, is sometimes you get the RFP and you rush in to kind of solve the question that they've asked, and actually then you're like, oh, wait, hold on a second, this is the wrong, you've fallen in love with the wrong problem. For me, because of my new technology focus, it is often that they've fallen in love with a solution. So for example, when we were working with Team GB, the British Olympic team, preparing for Tokyo 2020, they came to us initially saying, we want to do something with VR headsets. They say the problem we needed to solve, but really they wanted to use a solution. And so they'd come up with a problem that fitted the solution rather than the other way around. And so they were like, we want to be able to let the athletes see what the inside of the stadium looks like before they actually go there. And so can we use VR in order to do that? And it was a really bad idea, because for a variety of reasons. And so we did some really good research with them and got them to kind of take a step back and say, hold on a second, we don't think that will work, but let's really understand what the problem we're trying to solve. And so the problem statement we actually came up with in the end was, how do we make the Tokyo 2020 games, it was done in 2021 in the end, but was supposed to be the Tokyo 2020 games, how do we make that as much like a home games as possible? So like that was the key thing that we were actually trying to solve, and not just for the athletes, but also for the support staff, because actually often it's their bad experiences that then affect the athletes because their support staff have got lost or have become ill or haven't had the right equipment. And so we looked at it from that perspective. And the thing that in the end, we came up with like a comms platform, and we changed the way that they were doing comms within the within GB. I mean, because I know how these things work, I was like, okay, but we still need to get headsets in there somehow, because then that will make the board happy, because they'll have their headsets, but we've actually done something that's going to have a real impact. So the comms platform that we used, we were like, okay, you can use this to share content. And the whole thing was, it was then avoiding a bottleneck around the central comms team. You can use this to share content between the teams. And what we'll do is we'll send the teams out to Tokyo, the recce teams, with 360 cameras. And so the people they'll be able to post that footage onto the platform, and then people will be able to look at that footage using headsets. So we did something that was useful, but we also ticked the box for the board, because they were able to show athletes wearing headsets, and it was a tiny part of the project, but it meant that could go in their annual report, and that they were happy, athletes were happy. It meant that some of the teams stopped using email for comms completely, and just were using this platform, which I think was huge, because I mean, who wouldn't want to switch off emails? So yeah, it was that was like a really interesting example of where they were, they had partners lined up who were going to make the 3D models of the stadiums and everything like that, but we were able to say, whoa, that's that you've fallen in love with the solution, and that's led you to the wrong problem. Let's take a step back and look at it. And it was a related problem. Like, it was about how do you make the athletes feel more comfortable, but it was just looking at that problem as a problem rather than coming at it from a solution lens.
You do a lot of work for social impact. For example, you work with British Future. How does that shape the way you approach problems?
Well, when I started out, I hadn't heard of user-centered design or human-centered design when I started out working. Yeah, that came into my kind of lexicon in sort of 2011. That was when we started talking about that, and I joined in 2009. It's funny because actually thinking about it, when I first joined Deloitte, one of my first projects was working at John Lewis, and the first thing that I was doing was drafting BRD, so business requirements documents. I mean, user wasn't even really mentioned in that. Yeah, that was a whole interesting thing about, because we were then with John Lewis through their adoption of Agile and that move towards user-centered design, and we shifted to user stories. But when we started, it was very much business requirement documents with the John Lewis template. So when I started, user-centered design wasn't a thing for us, and when we started working that way, and I started working with the team that would become Deloitte Digital. I think that what I've learned as things have gone on is trying to think more in terms of this move more into systems thinking approach. And I think so the work that I do with social enterprises, which has always been a big driver for me, so even from very early on, I've felt very lucky that at Deloitte our scale means that we can do lots of different projects, including social impact projects, while also doing work for the regular clients. And this is part of society-centered design, is this shift towards all of our projects really should be social impact projects, and trying to bring that kind of thinking in as much as possible, I think has been the goal. And that's been driven by the work that we've done with social enterprises. I mean, one of the first social enterprises I worked with was part of our Social Innovation Pioneers program. And so that was Elvis and Cressy, who they make luxury goods using recycled fire hoses, but also other kind of recycled materials. And so that was a great social enterprise to work with early on. And the football game that I mentioned, that was with the social enterprise. So yeah, I think that I've done it because that was something that I was passionate about and that motivated me. But what I've tried to do in terms of how it's affected the rest of my work is try to bring in that the principles of inclusion and the principles of kind of society-centered design to what we're doing, because that laser sharp focus purely on the user, I think, has led to some less than ideal design decisions, particularly around social media, but around lots of things that have been built recently. And so I guess just trying to take that step back and think about it not in terms of the narrow problem of how do I make this particular app or solution sticky for this particular user, but actually what is the impact of that going to be beyond this user journey? Like how is that actually going to affect other people? Because really the problem we're trying to solve is not just what do we do to make this user spend money, but also, are we going to be leaving the campground tidier than when we found it, in terms of when we're looking wider and looking at society?
Across your career, you might have seen all the technologies, potentially future technology, and also redundant technologies. Do you still feel that clients understand user-centered design even in
It's
2025?
funny, isn't it? When you talk about openness to new technologies, there are two sides to it. So there is always this kind of tension between shiny object syndrome in terms of being too open to new technology and being uncritical of it, and status quo bias, where people are just they're overly wedded to the status quo. And so it's hard to say, isn't it? Because when you look at AI, which is obviously the technology du jour at the moment, there is a huge rush to adopt AI. And there's a lot of people running around trying to do all that they can, or at least appear to be doing all that they can to adopt AI. But at the same time, a real unwillingness potentially to do anything that might make them change some of the underlying systems. There's still this hope that people cling to, that finally one of these things will actually be the magic bullet that means that they don't have to do the hard work of the user-centered design, of correctly formatting their data, looking at their processes and making sure those are actually coherent across the organization. Every time they're hoping maybe this time it'll be the magic bullet. So I guess I don't think people are more receptive to technologies per se, but they are receptive to magic bullets. So like, people still want magic bullets, and I guess they will continue to want those. I think what's been interesting discussing AI adoption, particularly within software engineering, is I was chatting about this earlier this week with our team that's working on this within our organization, and I was struck by the similarity between some of the conversations that we're having now about using artificial intelligence to generate code, and the conversations that we were having about agile versus waterfall at the start of my career. So you're hearing a lot of the same things. People are saying, how can you can't design in this way because things are going to change. You're going to end up with an unstructured mess because you're doing this agile rather than waterfall, a very carefully structured process. Like, how will we deal with requirements that are changing midway through? So all of these accusations that are being leveled at AI generated coding do sound quite similar to what was being said at the time around agile versus waterfall. I would say that now I do feel like the same things apply, because I feel like in some ways I'm on the other side of that argument, because I'm not a skeptical voice. I'm very, very excited about the potential for these tools, but I am, I guess, on the side of the status quo, in that this is the way that software engineering has been done, and now we're changing changing it. But I think there was a recent Microsoft report that came out which said that the AI coding tools, they're like a mirror or an amplifier for what is already there in an organization. And I think that was true of Agile as well. Like all of those things that people said could go wrong with Agile would go wrong if you did it in the wrong way and if you didn't have kind of discipline within your engineering organization and you didn't follow best practice. So, and I think it's the same with this, like these nightmare situations that we've seen with vibe coding, a lot of them are just basic kind of engineering failures and they're basic kind of organizational failures rather than necessarily like a fundamental flaw with the tooling itself. I think it's just understanding the limitations of the tool and yeah, those people who back in the day were like, great, it's agile. That means we don't have to do anything before the project starts. We'll just start and figure it out as we go along. Like that's the same as how some people are using AI coding tools now. So that just when you were talking about adoption and people's willingness to adopt stuff, I think it's interesting how these how a lot of these conversations history does seem to repeat itself with these conversations. But I think that the thing that is the thing that I think is consistent is you can't skip the fundamentals. Like there's some stuff that is hard work, and there isn't kind of easy ways around those that hard work in terms of how you're structuring your engineering and in terms of how you're structuring your org. People try to avoid that hard work part of it, but that yeah, that needs to be done if you're going to see this technology adopted successfully. I was very passionate about agile, and I found the people arguing for waterfall, but it was a but you know, I'd worked on waterfall projects when I started. I knew I could see how much of a difference it made to work in this way, and it made so much more sense. And when I drew that parallel, I really don't want to end up being the waterfall person when we're talking about AI adoption in engineering, because I was not a fan of those people. So I don't want to be that old guy saying, yeah, don't stop, none of this newfangled thing. But I think it does have to be adopted responsibly.
Consulting is a fun industry, and I would love to learn more about your views, because we work in an industry where our incentives are not aligned with the incentives of the client. So the client wants to, let's say, go through change, which is going to help them maybe, increase the bottom line. Whereas in our world, in consulting, our bottom line is all about our billable hours. So how do you reconcile with these misaligned incentives?
It's a huge challenge for consulting. Consulting faces a lot of challenges at the moment. Partly it's the macroeconomic environment, which means that now would be a challenging moment in the cycle. Partly it's about AI and the fact that AI often sounds a lot like a consultant. It's very confidently stating something that it actually has no way of knowing is true, but it sounds good. And I think that for some people, that's then enough for them. And so that then poses a challenge for some of that type of work that consultants have been doing, and potentially a challenge as well in terms of scale delivery, because in theory, all these efficiencies from when you've got the Anthropic CEO saying that 90% of their code is going to be written by AI, people hear that and go, well, why am I paying for this many developers on a scale delivery project? And so all of those challenges, I think consulting is facing. But I think you hit upon the one that has been a challenge for the longest time. And now finally that confluence of forces, I think, is bringing about a reckoning on that, which is that it is this obsession with time and materials and billable hours. Because until consulting can get away from that, and that, to be honest, that's been the biggest disruption that I've tried to push my whole time while I've been at Deloitte, and it's been hard to push. But moving away from time and materials and towards outcome-based or value-based billing, because and it is really challenging. And I think but I think it's absolutely necessary for the type of work that we're doing, because often it doesn't relate to billable hours, particularly when you're focusing on the stuff that is coming from a lot of experience on the part of the person who's delivering it. I mean, there's this whole story, isn't there, about people are less prepared to pay a locksmith who takes 5 minutes to fix the lock. They're prepared to pay them less money than the person who takes an hour. And that simple story, but I think it applies to an extent within consulting as well. There's a lot of kind of presenteeism still. I think partly that comes down to not being clear enough up front as what success is really going to look like on the project, because success isn't that you spent 6 months there working 8 hours a day 5 days a week. There should be some clear success outcomes that you are trying to aim towards, and you should be able to put a value on that. But I think that often people aren't prepared to do that, have that conversation up front. And so I mean, it speaks to another big thing, which is I do think that trust is such a huge commodity at the moment in this space, but in other spaces as well. And I think that's being exacerbated by the rise of kind of AI generated content, and because trust is also helpful for separating signal from noise. And so I think that is really, really, really key. And I think that's going to be key for a value-based billing discussion, because you have to have a very honest conversation with your client up front if you are going to have that value-based billing conversation or outcome-based billing conversation. So I think you're absolutely right. I think I've definitely seen examples, let's just say they were with other consultancies, where those misaligned incentives have not led to the best outcomes for the clients. And I think that for a long time, though, that has been possible because there hasn't necessarily been any pressure to change that. But I think that right now there is a lot of pressure, as I said, from all these different angles. Maybe we will see that changing. Usman Sheikh is someone who writes about it on LinkedIn a lot, and talks about these changes happening to consulting. Yeah, maybe we'll see that change happen, but it's I feel that it's something that's been due for a long time.
Consulting is also ripe for disruption. On that note, Ed, thank you for your time.